I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. Hey, Steve. It is the start of summer, at least unofficially, in the United States. We're taping this on Memorial Day weekend. You will hear this the day after Memorial Day, so I hope you've had an awesome Memorial Day weekend. Steve had an idea based on it being Memorial Day for a topic. Tell us a little bit about what do you have in mind today, Steve?
Good morning, Matt. And I agree. I hope everyone out there had a nice Memorial Day. One of the things I always think about with Memorial Day especially is that it's become somewhat of a commercialized thing, and we sort of forget the meaning of it. People don't even know the meaning of it. And so I just sort of thinking, how do we tie that into what we talk about? A lot of people get confused with Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and they tell people thank you for your service, but that's not what it's about. It's obviously about remembering those who sacrificed their life in defending the freedom of our country. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that I have never been a service member.
Neither.
You neither. So, but I appreciate that. We know many who have been in our group. My dad was a World War II vet and all that kind of stuff. So, first of all, acknowledge that this day is a sacred day for those people who gave everything, the ultimate sacrifice. And I want to remember that on this day. And, before we all get too busy, I try not to do too much on this day. It's not a big shopping day for me anyway. So I started thinking, how do I tie that in? And it got me thinking about the third promise, the promise that says that we will not regret our past, nor will we shut the door on it. And what does that mean? How do I use my past to, number one, heal myself, okay, and help myself, but also to help other people. And, we sit in these meetings, in these rooms, and, there's guys and women who have nothing in common. And especially with a lot of the guys, and I'm sure it's like that with women. I just don't know because, I don't hear those messages. But I know guys who did long stints in prison. I'm talking 20 plus years and they come out and, when I first got here, it's like, how does that help me? This guy just did something so horrific, okay, that they had to spend 20 years in prison. And how can that help me? And our program tells us that it can help me. That information can. Number one, I could listen to this person and decide, I don't want to do that, because I don't feel like spending 20 years in prison. But also, when we start to look at this stuff, it's that whole identify and don't compare that we talk about all the time. So it's easy for me, and it was easy for me when I first came in, to discard those type of people. I talked about this before when I came into this program. I had a brother who passed last year, who was one of us, and he was the typical crackhead, big drug user, lived in the woods, all that kind of stuff. So I compared my addiction to his, and my drug use and my alcohol use to his, and thought, that doesn't, that I'm not the same as that. So when I came into these rooms, when I finally came into this room, I still thought I was different. And I can remember thinking that I needed meetings that would be different than the meetings my brother went to, right? He was that low bottom drunk, and I needed sort of a higher up meeting because I wasn't that. So that sort of got me thinking about my past and how that. And so I started thinking about, what about remembering, memorializing my past? And how can I use that to help other people? Not only that, but how can I continue to remind myself that there were things in my past that I don't want to forget about. I don't want to bury them, but I don't want to relive them, right? I don't want to take those actions again. So that was the whole thought about it, just trying to think of how we tie all this in together. So I don't know where we'll go with that, but that's sort of what I was thinking.
I think there's a lot to go through with that. I think, first of all, empathy. That's the first place my mind goes to, is empathizing with somebody who on the surface looks different than me. We're not all that different. to me, COVID solidified this in the way that the virus went in, and if it found human DNA, it found a place to replicate. It didn't care how old or young we were, or what our skin color was, or what our sexual orientation was. It was enough to go in and replicate because we were enough the same to the virus than we were different. That's important, and I think about it that way. And I think about somebody who walks into an AA room and they had been in prison for 20 years. I can think somebody off the top of my head spent a good stretch in prison. And it's somebody who I like a great deal and who I care about a great deal, because the person who was in prison didn't define who that person was. Take the alcohol away and get them fixed up, meaning recovered and not needing to drink. And this is a really good person. And it's like sculpture. Good sculpture, the sculptor looks at a block of wood and sees that the sculpture was there already. I'm just removing the outer coating. And I think that people who go into recovery are like that. This person was already there. They just were covered by something else. And they needed some help to peel that away.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, the way you describe that, Matt. And I think that's a great analogy for all people, not just alcoholics, but for particularly alcoholics and addicts, right? Is that there is a person underneath that addiction, right? And you can't see and get at that person until you peel some of that excess stuff or some of that bad stuff. You may take a piece of whatever it is, marble or whatever, and you got to chip away some of the bad stuff, some of the unsightly stuff, and then you can turn into this beautiful thing if you have that vision. And that's one of the things we talk about too, right? A vision for you is one of the chapters in our book. If you have that vision of what you want to be or what you think you can be, or maybe somebody else has that vision for you, then you can find that. So I was thinking about it, like you said, there's one person who's fairly new to me, been around meetings for a long time, but new to me within the past, say, 18 months, maybe not quite, but who's another guy, right? Big guy, motorcycle guy, big, did big stretch in prison, and we did not we did not get off on the right foot. Like, we didn't care for each other, and he came to this retreat that I was setting up, and I didn't know him. Like, he was coming to this retreat, and some of the stuff, and I admit this, like when I do something like that, I'm very much a control freak in that, and I like things a certain way, and I push people to fit into that, and part of it has to do when you run a retreat. One of the most problematic thing is getting people to pay up and collect money. And I'm very pushy with that. I'm like, listen, we're grown men, pay it up. If you have a problem, just let me know and we'll do a payment plan, whatever it is. And there was not enough of that communication going on, and I was pushy, and he didn't know me. And he wasn't particularly fond of that pushiness that I had. But we love each other now, like literally, like we went to a retreat, and that's one of the beautiful things about this program. We went on a retreat, we spent 2.5 days together, whatever, a day and a half or 2 days together, and we met. So it's like, and I could listen to this guy now. Now I could listen to this guy because and this is the other thing, right? I've been able to clear away that ugly shit, so that now this guy and I can sit in the same room and he can share stuff, and I could listen, and I can grow from his mistakes. I could grow from his message. I watch this guy. I don't know if there's another guy that I've seen, and this is a guy with long-term sobriety, who constantly has new sponsees. Like, he is constantly helping other men. And I'm just in awe of that, like how much time he puts into helping other men. So, I look at that, and it's a great analogy. So I had to think about my past. Like, there's a lot of things I did in my past that I'm not proud of, right? I mean, I did. I had a lot of bad behaviors, and some of them weren't, they weren't prison bad behaviors. Although I did enough stuff that, in the past, I was lucky enough that I didn't get caught doing some of the things I was doing, because they would have ended me up with some jail time or whatever. But I think that's a lot of people. So I have to look at that. I have to be grateful that I had never had to do that kind of stuff. And then I have to remember. And just I don't want to go on too long here, but there's another guy who came back, and you probably know this guy. He's been coming to Friday night meeting. I'll tell you something. If you met this guy in the street, he's tall, he's handsome, he's clean cut. Okay, he speaks quietly and softly, and just got out of 2.5 years in jail. Because he had some type, and I don't even know the story. I just know there was some type of family relationship issue that he couldn't let go, and he ended up in 2.5 years in jail. And it's like, so you never know. And again, this is another guy who I like, and I'm just starting to get to know him. He's a young guy, probably your age, these are the things that I have to look for and say, do I want to do that? Do I want to behave in a way that could put me in that position? The answer today is no.
I look at people like that a little bit differently. Here's the story I see. I see it as a test of what I can empathize with, or what can I see the connection with, and can I move past what they have done? All right, so I haven't gone to prison. They went to prison. Should that define the person? Is it worth getting to know somebody a little bit more so maybe I can be helpful to that person? Or maybe there is something I can learn from them. Don't shut yourself off from new ideas. There is, you look at TV and anybody goes to prison is clearly evil. Well, that may or may not be the case. It could be a case of there's shades of gray. I don't know if most people are inherently good or inherently evil. Sometimes you make one bad decision at the wrong time and you have consequences.
Yeah.
And it could be a small, like for me, the things I look back at is I wasn't wrapping trees around cars, but I had nasty comments to say, or I held myself back from other people, or I was passive aggressive. Little things, but those little things add up.
Absolutely. Those things are, again, the things you're talking about probably were impacting the people that you cared about mostly,
Yes.
Not all the time, but mostly, right? Because I could do all those things to people I don't like at work or in other situations too. But those type of things, most of the times were impacting the people that I cared most about, or I should have been caring most about, put it that way. And I agree, a lot of that stuff. And again, I'm a controlling person. I like to be in control. I like things neat. I like to feel like I have control. And trust me, it's much better now. I'm able to give a lot of that up really because of this program, not for no other reason. For me doing this 12 steps, and for me continuing to go to meetings and listening to other alcoholics who have that same problem. And I go, okay, well, they're dealing with it, and I need to deal with it too. So I could be that nasty person. I could be that controlling person. Like I could be all of those things. I can be that angry person, right? I mean, there's a lot of anger, fear-based anger. And I talk about, there's a couple of guys who I really relate to. We talk about it all the time. Fear-based anger. When and that started as a child for me. When I got afraid, I got angry because sometimes when I was afraid, it was the neighborhood I grew up in. It was because I was being bullied or being threatened. And then I just might have to fight somebody because, that's just the way it was, right? Just the way I had to do. So I just associated those two. That unfortunately went right through my adulthood, right through my marriages, and it took me a long time to identify that, to fix that. And maybe if I had done a better job with my therapy that I was doing. But anyway, that's here nor there. So it's those type of things that today I look at, and those are the things I work on today, right? I mean, you don't have to worry about me, back in the day when I was, smoking pot and doing that kind of stuff. And, and I was buying fairly decent quantities of that because I learned that if I bought a quantity of marijuana, that I could smoke a bunch of it and I could sell some of it, and it made it cheaper. I was always frugal. It made it cheaper for me to smoke my pot, right? Because other people were smoking. So I just started to, and that put me in situations where I was going to people's houses who had large quantities of marijuana, right? I mean, if I happen to be there when that house gets raided, or I happen to be one of the people that the cops are staking out, then I get busted. So it's those type of things, right? That I could have been, that are bigger, that I've had some grace that nothing ever happened about. So So I look back at that, and it's like, those are the bad things. I don't have to worry about those things anymore, but I do have to worry about those snide comments, those impatience, that just that whole thing that comes with life in general, that I have to be careful that I'm always working on, controlling my emotion. I've talked about it here. It's a term, emotional sobriety, that I work on all the time.
Me
all
too.
the time. Because that's what happens to me when I lose that emotional sobriety. Then I get sharp, I get ugly, and I'm not fun to be around.
Yep, me too. If I feel like I've been taken advantage of, that makes me angry. Those are the things that bother me the most when I feel taken advantage of. So I open my ears to listen to everybody around me of how to do this better. That could be somebody who spent time in prison. It could be somebody with a corporate job. But if you shut your mind off to, I have nothing to learn from this person, then you're not going to get better. The more that I look at, the more I have to learn from everybody, regardless of who they are, that I'm open to hearing something really good. You never know.
Right.
You might hear crap. I went to a church service for a baptism where I was listening to the pastor, and he started with something really good about his childhood and then never deviated for 40 minutes. And my son was like, I don't know where to tie that together. I go, you're thinking too hard. There's nothing to tie together.
Right.
It was complete rubbish.
Right.
I think that's also worth knowing. Don't be so empathetic that you don't know when to say, okay, time to move on from this.
Right.
This isn't wisdom. This is nonsense. And you can hear a lot of nonsense, but that's okay too. Know the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to get that, right? If you're out in the public, if you're out dealing with people, especially if you're out doing what we do, which is dealing with a bunch of different, really alcoholics people. So we all have our problems. We bring those problems to our meetings a lot of time. You're going to hear a lot of rubbish. And again, you talk about empathy a lot, and I try to have it. I don't think I have it in the manner that you do. I'm much better with it. But one of the things you said there, and I just want to touch base on it because it's something that I learned a lot of. You said that you get angry, you get pissed off when you feel like you're being taken advantage of. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you something about that. And I would get pissed off if I felt like I allowed myself to be taken advantage of. Like, that was the worst thing. Today I can realize if somebody takes advantage of me, that's on them, right? Like, that's their behavior. But if I allow myself, and I've done this many a times, I would really beat myself up over that. So again, and that's having some empathy for ourselves too. Like, yeah, we all make mistakes, but a lot of garbage out there, garbage in, garbage out. There's a lot of these sayings that we talk about. So if you want to have, if you want to have a good life, then you got to think about what you're consuming on all aspects, and that includes information, that includes other people's stuff. So you got to be careful with some of the stuff out there.
I look back to my past, and there's a lot of stuff that have happened that just gives me pain looking back. I don't like that those things happened, and I try to look and say, then don't do it again. Mm-hmm. But there is some PTSD around those things. And substances help me get through them. I don't have the ability to get through those with substances anymore. I've got to find other tools. We were at a baptism yesterday, and I had left to drop my son off somewhere, and then I came back. My wife was telling me one of the people there sparked up a joint in the backyard. And she was mentioning, I think she has, some issues. And I'm thinking she probably does. That sparking up a joint is the thing that helps her get through those things. And my wife was kind of taken aback. I'm like, well, in Connecticut, it's legal. Mm-hmm. I just was thinking through, and you're saying, getting busted in a raid. People listen to this 5-10 years
right
down the line who are younger, and the whole idea of getting arrested for marijuana will be such a foreign concept. I mean, it is now in Connecticut. It's everywhere.
Right.
Like, you can't, like, they had beer there, so why can't you roll out a joint, especially if you bought it at a dispensary?
I get it. I get it. Yep. Not everybody agrees with that. And certainly as long as your hosts are okay with that, then that's the key, right? As long as the hosts are okay with it, then there's nothing wrong with it. Because like I said, it's legal in Connecticut. Listen, I go back to the 80s with my advocacy. I loved smoking pot when I was young, but it wasn't a big deal. I won't say it wasn't a big deal. I was able to give it up a lot easier than alcohol when I decided to give it up. But there was a group back then called Normal, which was trying to get marijuana legal back in the 80s. And I went to the Capitol, at the time, and it was still illegal. And there was talk like, oh, I wonder if they're taking our pictures. But we went for a rally. We went into the Capitol. We went into the session of the state people trying to push this. And there was a lot of support for it even back then, but not enough to push it until recently. But yeah, I mean, listen, that's how we get, that's how we get through our shit, it's I don't know, like I said, is it any different really than somebody pounding a bunch of drinks? I mean, we see those people too. We go to that backyard party and I mean, you got the people there who are going to pound their stuff. So
they were pounding hard at 10:30 yesterday in the morning.
Absolutely. So somebody just said that. I know the woman where I started doing some of this volunteer work. It was Mother's Day, and they were like, hey, how's your Mother's Day? And she's like, oh, great. I went over to my sister's house, and we're going to do this. And she's like, oh, let's have some drink. And she goes, but it was 10:30 in the morning. Who drinks at 10:30 in the morning? And I went, oh, a lot of people drink at 10:30 in the morning, right? But here's a person who's not an alcoholic and doesn't get. Her sister was drinking at 10:30 in the morning and trying to encourage her to drink. So some people love to do that, but not me. I don't know. It's like I said, it's a continuing learning process for me. And for the other thing for me is continuing reinforcement of what I learn. And that's why, again, we ties it back to this sort of theme of my past. One of the things you said, I've told my kids they're welcome to listen. I share things like I didn't share a lot of my story with my kids growing up. And I told them when I started doing this podcast, I'm like, hey, I'm doing this podcast. You're welcome to listen to it, but be aware of what you're going to hear. You're going to hear some stuff that, is different than the dad you grew up with. And so be careful. And my daughter asked me, she's like, you okay with me? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I am 100% okay with you listening to it. And one of the things that it was so devastating for me is that when I really accepted my behavior, right, my drinking behavior or my alcoholic behavior, because some of my worst behavior was when I wasn't drinking. When I really accepted that, one of the things I had to revisit, because I was in denial of it for a long time, was how I handled my first marriage and the damage and the harm I did to a woman who deserved none of that, and my kids. I harmed my kids through it too, not through physically or stuff like that, but just through how getting a divorce and all that kind of stuff. That was extremely painful. Oh my God! When I finally came to terms with that, it took me a long time. I mean, it was gut wrenching. It hurt my stomach to really revisit that for a long time. And the only way I could deal with that is to go through it. And now today I could look at it and I could go, yeah, it sucked, but I don't have that same feeling. It doesn't impact me as hard. But man, it helps me be a better person because I've acknowledged it. I've owned it. And I certainly have no intention and do not want to ever do that to another person again in my life.
This is where the 12 steps come in.
Yeah.
The 12 steps are there as a tool to get through that pain that you realized, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I created a lot of waves here and I created a lot of damage from that wake. You get through it by looking at the steps. What are you involved? Where's your part? And how do I make it right? And how do I make sure it doesn't happen again? And how do I keep myself on the beam? The promises only happen once you've gone through the steps.
Right.
I don't know how clear that always is in the book, but the way it's written is once you go through all the steps and you do the things you need to do, then here are the things that we promise will happen, especially if you continue to do the work.
Right.
And promise number 3 is one of those things that you can get past the pain of the past, but you can learn from it.
Right. And then you could use it to help other people. Right. And one of the great stories that I had is that happened. And it just happened to me by happenstance. Our Monday night meeting, I was there. This was years ago. And I was there and I was doing coffee. And I was in the kitchen at the old the Wapping Church, which we're going back to. And this guy was talking to another alcoholic, another guy in your age group. And he was talking about how he was divorced and he had 2 kids and he was having a hell of a time managing that whole divorce with his ex-wife. And I thought to myself, man, I could help this guy, right? That's my past, right?
Yep.
I struggled to, and I'm like, I could help that guy with that situation. So I said to him, like, listen, if you ever want to talk, I went through what you're going through. Like, it was identical. Like his ex-wife was a lot harder than mine. But early on, my divorce was pretty ugly. And he asked me, and sure, we got together. I helped him, took him through the steps. We're still decent friends today. We still see each other. But it was one of these things where my past was able to help him, right? It's exactly what we're talking about with this promise. We don't want to shut the door on it because we could use it to help another struggling alcoholic.
If we don't step up and help other people, how are they going to learn how to help somebody else? How are they going to learn what it means to work this program? That's why we stick around.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that keeps you sober. If you pass the message along and if you learn the right message and you pass along the right message, it goes down many generations.
Yep.
That's an important thing to do. One of the reasons we do this podcast.
It's the reason why we do it.
It's a way of sharing the message. I'd love to hear your message. How did this resonate with you? Can you look back on the past? Get past it, but not forget it. Is it hard? Is it something that's easy? Has it tripped you up? We'd love to know. SoberFriendsPod.com, the email address, Matt@SoberFriendsPod.com, or you can check us out on Instagram @SoberFriendsPod. I'd love for you to go to Apple and give us a 5-star review and let us know what you like, what we could change. It helps us know when we are on track. Steve, happy Memorial Day.
Yeah, you too, Matt. Enjoy the rest of the day. And I don't know if you're planning on going to a meeting tonight, but if you are, I'll see you then.
All right. I'll see you. I'm planning on it. We'll see what happens.
Yep, got it.
We'll see everybody next week.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod.